First of all, I'd like to mention that these Sunday classes and our webinars are both recorded, as you just heard, and will be available on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel at youtube.com. Just look for BYU Family History Library. And they will also be available on the BYU Family History Library website, the byu.edu website. In addition to that, when you go to the BYU Family History Library website, which is the one I just mentioned, we also have a link to virtual help. And I would encourage people to use that. Click on that little link in the upper right-hand corner of the website. And then one more click and you are talking to someone in the library and can get help with any of your genealogical questions. We're going to be talking today about the links that are to WorldCat, OCLC WorldCat, and Archive Grid. Now, if you've done any searches at all in the catalog on FamilySearch.org website, this is the basic search. So when you go to the search tab on FamilySearch.org and click on catalog, then you'll get this search field, and it will ask for a place, and it will ask and give you some options of surnames, titles, authors, subjects, etc. And then you'll have on the right-hand side two links, one to OCLC WorldCat, the other one to the Archive Grid. So why does FamilySearch Catalog have links to WorldCat and Archive Grid? And I guess the real question is, why don't more people use the catalog? And if they are using the catalog, why it has never occurred to them to click on the other catalogs to consider that are in FamilySearch.org. So that's kind of the basis, the idea of this particular presentation is to give some determination to answer that question. And if you've ever wondered about them and haven't ever clicked on them or don't know what they are, then this is why we're here today to kind of explain that whole situation. But in order to do that and to understand these two websites, we have to step outside of FamilySearch, the FamilySearch website, get completely out and talk about things in general, particularly about catalogs in general. So this is, first of all, as genealogists, we're looking for information. Libraries and archives have records containing genealogical information, okay? So if we're looking for information and libraries and archives have records containing genealogical information, we should probably be looking in libraries and archives. Now, in today's world, it usually never occurs to most people, actually, even when they're sitting in the library, that there are books out there that contain genealogical information. And that information and other types of archive materials, such as journals, Bibles, letters, manuscripts, all kinds of different things are all contained in these libraries and archives. And so there's a kind of direct relationship between the information that we want as genealogists and the information that these libraries and archives have that we want to have. And so what I'm trying to explain is that there's this mindset that says, well, if I've looked on FamilySearch and I've looked on Ancestry, then basically I don't know what to do next. Well, the next thing to do is to start learning about where all the other records are located, where all the rest of the information is available, and begin that process of doing genealogical research. So let's jump to when you go to a library and archive, basically the information in the library is cataloged. And the idea of a catalog is that the people who do catalogs, the catalogers, create categories for dividing up the physical location of their records. So you want all the records on this category over in this spot. You want all the records in this category on this other place, and you want all the records over here. The problem with catalogs is that some of the records belong in more than one spot. So you might have a record on the history of Arizona, but it contains information about genealogy in Arizona, and it also contains information about mining, and it may have information about all sorts of other things. And so the catalogs do a lot of cross-referencing. And some of you may not be old enough to have ever used a paper catalog. When I began working as an undergraduate at the University of Utah, just after my wife and I got married, my first job, officially job at the university, was as a bibliographer at the University of Utah Library. And my job as a bibliographer involved checking book orders ordered by the professors. So if a professor said, "I want this book," then they would hand the card to me or one of the other students who were bibliographers, and they would say, "Tell us if this book is in the library." And also, by the way, check to make sure that the cataloging information, that the name and the subject and all of that are correct, because the professor may have only given you part of the title or left off the name of the author or something else. So I spent many, many, many hours standing at the catalog in the University of Utah Library, which was exactly like this, with drawers and 3x5 cards, flipping through 3x5 cards. Now, you've seen the current young people's abilities and younger people's abilities to thumb text on a phone. So you can watch them do their phones, and they go with their thumbs, and they make all this, they can write all these little text notes back and forth. Well, my skill was that I could flip through the cards quickly. So could anybody else that stood there for the time that I did for almost 4 years of sitting in front of the catalog. So we got pretty fast of going through the catalog. We also had to go find out if the book was actually where the book physically was located. And so we would walk around the library and try and find the book, and sometimes ended up discovering that the book was sitting in a professor's office, or if it was in the basement of the library or someplace. So that whole process was just something that we did. And the byproduct of that was, of course, that I learned kind of intimately there how the library was functioning. So that's kind of the background of where all this comes from. So these card catalogs have been partially, to some extent, out there in the world, reproduced electronically. Started, and by the way, I thought this might be interesting to see. This is actually the same thing. That card catalog that I showed you with the drawers, these are the drawers out there. If you look on the tables, I don't know if you see my cursor, but on the tables, you can see all the individual drawers that have been pulled, and the people are there doing the search job, which, by the way, was the same job that I had at the University of Utah. And you can see a man standing on the second floor, and then over to the right a little bit, there are two more men, and above them is another man. That gives you some scale to the size. This is the paper catalog for the Library of Congress in 1919. So these paper catalogs were massive, and you can see how many people here were employed in finding and cataloging and going through the catalog. And and what isn't being shown is all the time they had to go to the actual items, all of the books and records and everything else that were should have been in the catalog, and to verify that those items were still in the Library of Congress, and also to locate the physical item when somebody wanted the physical item. Okay, so this is kind of a long process, and the whole idea here was to give you access to information that was contained in the library or in the archives. Also, it's interesting to know that not all of the huge card catalog systems have been digitized and are online. That's in the date of this particular presentation in 2022. There remain a lot of paper catalogs out there. They are not at this point accessible other than physically going to the library or the archives and going through their card catalog, their physical 3x5 card catalog. And I might mention that there are other card catalogs in historical societies and other organizations that also have card catalogs. And so it brings us up to the almost obvious conclusion that some genealogical research at some level will always, 100% of the time, require you, me, and every genealogical researcher to take a trip to some location to view the information that we want to view. And perhaps that explains why I'm living in Provo and living next to a very large university library. And we'll keep talking a little bit about that. Okay, so there are billions of other genealogical valuable records in the catalogs of the libraries and archives around the world. We just cannot even begin to comprehend the amount of information that is available that just goes far beyond anything you find on FamilySearch or on Ancestry or any of the other large online genealogical websites. The information may not be, if all you're focusing on when you go to do genealogical research is a name and a date and a place, and you want to do whatever with that particular information, then basically you're not doing genealogical research, you're just simply copying names, dates, and places. But when you want to go beyond that and branch out into getting information about your family, and about your ancestors, and actually turn them into real people that you can understand and begin to do some understand their real relationships and where they really lived and how they lived, then beyond that is all this information that's still out there in huge quantities, almost unimaginable amounts of information, even in a library. A very large library like the BYU Harold B. Lee Library, or any of the other large hundreds and thousands of other libraries across the country and across the world. So what is the FamilySearch Catalog? Well, the FamilySearch Catalog was a 3x5 card catalog, literally. When I started going to the Family History Library, telling my age, it was a 3x5 card library, which I was very much accustomed to at that point, and knew how to find things in the library rather quickly. And so it was very convenient. Didn't take too much energy to pull out the drawers and flip through the cards and find what you were looking for. Obviously, when you start working with a catalog, the idea of a catalog presupposes that you can categorize the information that you're searching for in some way that corresponds to the way that the catalogers have organized their information. So let me give you a quick example of that. Let's suppose I wanted to find parish registers in Ireland, Catholic parish registers in Ireland. If I was walking into a library to look for information on a book about parish registers, or something that or a document that might contain that, or an archive that might contain that, I would need to know the catalog ideas? Well, first of all, the obvious one is the location. And that's the way the Family Search Catalog is organized, as I've already mentioned. It's all by location. It's just a search for places. And so then it's in Ireland. So you would go in to the library and inquire to where their catalog, and you would go to Ireland, and you'd start looking through the Ireland records. And since a parish register is a church record, you would look for Ireland churches, because it would probably be most cataloged under churches. So the churches, and then you would see if there was anything under parish registers. That would give you a fairly quick idea if there were records in that particular library on that subject. Now, that wouldn't get you there completely, because you would also need to go to other categories, for instance, genealogy, and see if there's anything cataloged under genealogy and parish registers in Ireland. And then you want to go to records about the Catholic Church and see if there are any Catholic Church records that come up being cataloged in Ireland. And so there's just this kind of a stream of consciousness thing where you associate what you're trying to find with any of the categories that could come to mind that someone might have used to catalog that information. So a catalog is not a one-on-one search. We get used to clicking on Google and coming up with information based on a word-by-word search of documents across the internet. But what we have to understand is that these documents inside of these repositories, meaning all of these libraries and archives, are not digitized. And even if they are digitized, they're not digitized word by word. They're just digitized into groups of collections that are cataloged under the old catalog system of subject, and primarily with genealogical documents by place. Okay, so that kind of gets a little complicated, but it is there's really no other way to explain it. So FamilySearch is a huge database of digital images from the Family History Library. So basically that's the core. Now there's a lot of other images out there now that particularly among the books that have come from other libraries and other repositories. So, and when I use the word repository, that means where records repose. In other words, where they're kept. So when I say repositories, that means a place where records are kept. And so the Family History Library and the Family Tree program are basically the database and a family tree are integrated, and they are essentially the entire website. Now, there's a lot of other stuff on there, blah, 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 all sorts of things, but all those other things on there are additions to this core concept of a database of records attached electronically through programming to a family tree. Okay, so now we have the whole idea here. And now here's an important thing. We're going to start a little focusing now on the catalog on FamilySearch. The catalog there contains entries about the records sets, the collections, and it doesn't give you names and dates and places. It gives you where those names and dates and places may be recorded. Now, the entries on the FamilySearch catalog can be searched by Google. So if you do a Google search for parish registers in Armagh, Ireland, then you will find entries, if there are any, that are in the FamilySearch catalog. So in essence, even if you go into FamilySearch website and click on the catalog and then go and search the catalog, you're searching directly. If you go on Google, you're going to get everything else, and you may get a few entries to the FamilySearch catalog. So this is kind of complicated, but that's the connection out there. Once these records have been digitized, once the catalogs have been digitized, then they can be used in a lot of different ways. And important, though, to understand that the content of those records cannot be searched by Google. So you're not going to get a name off of a parish register in Ireland. Even if it's there, you'll get the name of the parish register, but you won't get the name. So how do you get the name? Well, the name is you get the name when somebody indexes or goes through either electronically or person doing it individually, individual indexers doing it, and take those names off and put them in a form that then can be searched by the computer. Okay, but we have an unimaginable, and I keep using that term, but there's no way to actually quantify it, amount of information that remains on paper documents and on microfilm and on any other kind of actual physical media where the information might be kept. A lot of the jobs have been done. For example, FamilySearch began using microfilm back in 1938. They discontinued it in 2017. And since that time, they have, by using a tremendous amount of technology and increasing the technology substantially from the beginning, they finally managed this past year in 2021 to announce that they had finished digitizing all of the 2.4 million rolls of microfilm. But there are many more millions of rolls of microfilm out there that perhaps are waiting to be digitized. In fact, the contents of almost all the world's libraries and archives can't be accessed by Google. So you're doing Google searches, you're ignoring libraries and archives. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. There's just no other way that you can begin to understand the connection between doing research and doing research in libraries and archives that does not involve some effort. And right now, I'm doing some research and I'm very much involved in libraries and archives, and I've already identified documents that I physically have to go look at in order to get the information that I need. But I'm going to I'm still in the stage of the survey stage where I will try to figure out if all the information I need is online or if I actually do have to go physically over to the BYU library and special collections and look at some more information. Okay, so that's kind of what happens in this situation. And so the only way to see the content of the records and family tree entries on the FamilySearch.org website is to register, log in, and view the records in the indexed historical record collections. Or they can be in the unindexed records listed in the catalog or in the raw unindexed and uncatalogued images. So we have, when you do the search tab, you have records. That takes you to the historical record collections. That's the record collection that can be searched because those records are, to some extent, indexed. Not all of them, but to some extent. And yet there are still unindexed records, even on the records listed in the historical record collections. And then the unindexed records are all listed by category in the catalog. And then the raw, unindexed, and uncatalogued records, meaning the pile of records that are being digitized every day around the world, are all piled in the historical images, which is also under the search. So you have the search tab, it says search, then you click and you come down, it says records, then it says images, and down near the bottom it says catalog, and then it says books. Okay, so those are the areas where the records on the FamilySearch website are being kept. If you haven't explored the historical images section under images or the catalog, then this is obviously the idea here is to help you understand that the information that you're looking for may very well be available in one of those three areas on FamilySearch. But if not, then they're out to the libraries. So the only way we can see what resources are out there in all these libraries is to find them in their individual catalogs. So here we are, we've made the circle. If you're doing research and you go online and you're not finding the information, or you need to find more information, or you even want to, you become aware of the fact that you would like to know more information about your family, then you find out that you can't find it on Ancestry and you can't find it on FamilySearch, and you go out and do a Google search and you can't find it. And then where do you go? Well, you go to the libraries and archives of the world. And you start with the public library in your town, and then you go to the nearest university library, and then you go to the nearest archive, state archive or county archive, or wherever you have records, and or you go to the area where the person lived and start that same process. Okay. So if the resources are online, you may be able to see them online. Otherwise, you may have to physically visit the libraries and archives. So that's kind of the conclusion. And before you visit the library, you should always do an exhaustive search online to see if the documents or resources you need are digitized and available on other websites. So yeah, sure.
There's a question about this, and I think you just answered it, but let me just read it to you. So if I want to look at records in libraries in Illinois, I need to look at any libraries in the town or county. Then do I need to call to see if they have archives, or how to access what is available to me in Utah to see? Are there other choices to learn the genealogy?
I'm about to solve that problem right now.
Awesome, great.
Yes, and that is why that question, it gives us exactly why I am here today talking about WorldCat and Archive Grid. Okay, so here we go. WorldCat and Archive Grid connect you to billions of online catalog entries. You have in your one click away from FamilySearch, you can put in worldcat.org and you can put in Archive Grid. Archive Grid is actually part of OCLC WorldCat. OCLC is an acronym which has lost its acronymity, I guess you'd call it. It doesn't have any real meaning anymore. It's just OCLC, and it's the name of the company that began this process of building the world's largest catalog many, many years ago. And then basically it got so that everybody, in the libraries, everybody uses acronyms. It's kind of like the Army, everybody uses acronyms. And the more you're in the library, the more acronyms you're going to have. For example, Library of Congress is to me is also always and always will be LOC. So when I say I'm going to go look in the LOC, that meant I was going to look in the Library of Congress. But if I go to say I'm going to look in OCLC at WorldCat, I don't say that. I just say WorldCat. And WorldCat is the catalog of all the not all the catalogs, but more catalogs than you can imagine, and a lot of them in Illinois. So let's go on to the next level here. So it has over 2 billion catalog entries. That's 2 billion entries. That's not 2 billion documents or anything like that, or names or anything. It's 2 billion different entries of records, documents, books, manuscripts, videos, anything that has been cataloged by a library will show up in the catalog entries. Because what happens here is, for example, the Brigham Young University Library, Harold B. Lee Library, when they took their catalog, they made a digital copy of all of their catalog items, and then they continued only to add items to the electronic catalog. And then when they joined OCLC or WorldCat, basically WorldCat got their entire catalog. And so they can go in. Now, if you do a search in on the BYU at BYU in the Brigham Young University library, at Harold B. Lee Library on the library search, not the family history library, but the library, then you will get a question that says, do you want to follow this search up in WorldCat, or do you want to follow it up on the BYU catalog? So it depends on whether you're trying to find a book generally or whether you want to see if it's in the BYU library. But we'll see that that also is answered by what happens with WorldCat. So what kind of things do you put into a search on WorldCat? Anything. Irish parish registers. And so you're back to whatever it is you're looking for. You just put it in. You'll see there a tab for books, DVDs, CDs, and articles. So you can kind of filter out. If you want everything, then you just click on anything. By the way, I just leave everything on everything, because if I'm looking for information, I don't want to have to search over and over again to get the same information. So I'll search everything as I can find. And then if I don't find it, then I'll go out on Google and look. And then if I don't find it on Google, I'll go further. The other day, I was looking for an item, and I did find it on WorldCat, and I did find it on some libraries, and they all didn't have digital copies of it. And eventually I found a microfilm copy on FamilySearch. So, you know, my search went around in a circle, because I came right back to where I started. But then I actually found every page of the document on a microfilm roll, which I could access, which is basically one other way of getting to the information. So WorldCat is the world's largest network of library content and services. The libraries are dedicated to providing access to their resources on the web, where most people start their search for information. So part of the whole process here with WorldCat is to give incentive to the libraries to electronically provide their information. And that has been very, very successful in many cases. So you have to search on WorldCat all sorts of different ways. You'll see down format, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff down the sides of the listed catalog type entries. So when you get down on the list over here on the left-hand side of WorldCat entries, so if I put in Tanner family genealogy, I start getting out a lot of things. And there is a book called the Tanner Family Genealogy, and there is many other things here that I could have a look at. In fact, there are about 502 things that show up under those three terms. That doesn't mean that's all there are. That just means that if I use those three terms, that's what I get. And if I start learning from what I'm seeing, then, or I become more specific, I get more specific about the individual items or information that I may be looking for. What I'm going to end up with is a book, or a manuscript, or a microform, or an ebook, or whatever, but I will come up with something that I can then look further for additional information about the subject that I'm searching or researching. Okay, so the next step, and remember, this is a catalog search. It's not a full text search. You're not looking for every word in every document. If you want to do that, the largest catalog out there and the largest word-for-word search of resources that I'm aware of that exist today is not the Library of Congress. It is archive.org. And the reason why there is because it searches word for word all of the 32 million, they're up to 36 million right now, 36 million plus books that are completely digitized and other documents, including a tremendous number of genealogical records. So that's archive, archive.org, archive.org. When you enter your zip code into the WorldCat and you have an entry like this, and I found a book called William Tanner of North Kingstown, Rhode Island and His Descendants, that book I put in my zip code, and that book then tells me that there's a copy of that book in the BYU library. There's one in Montana. There's one in California. And there are 3 pages of these of libraries that have this book. Well, suppose I don't find it in my library. I mean, I don't live in next to any of the libraries that are listed. Then I can go to my own library, wherever it is. If they have interlibrary loan, I may have to pay a fee for the interlibrary loan. But if I have a library card, maybe I don't have to pay a fee. It just depends on the library. And then they can, in some cases, order that item and have it come to your library, and then your library will have that book, and then you can check it out. You may have to read the book in the library. It may not be able to. In many cases, it won't be allowed to be taken out of the library. But in other cases, you can actually check it out, take it home, whatever, use it for the 2 weeks or the 10 days or whatever the term is, and then return it to the library. So you can check a book out of a library all the way across the United States and perhaps other places as well. So in addition to that, when you find an item in WorldCat, which is something that I use exhaustively, is to get a citation to that. And when I say citation, I mean what I'm going to put in the source when I cite that particular item on FamilySearch. So I'm going to search, and then I can copy a citation. And when I do that, I can copy it right out of WorldCat, and I don't have to retype it. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to make up the citation. I can simply cite that. You can also cite and export, and it will export it to any one of those programs you have down there, which you're unlikely to have, by the way, because those are library programs. Now, the work of the libraries has been immensely benefited by this, because when one library catalogs an item, then anyone else who comes along who obtains the item, other libraries, hundreds of libraries that may get the same item, all of a sudden they can just go here and get the entire cataloging information. They don't have to redo the cataloging. And then they can simply go in and say, we have this in our library, and add that to their library, and the book, wherever it is cataloged. And the whole idea here is, of course, if you went to the library and you wanted the physical book, that the cataloging information would tell you where the book was located and physically. And so if you had what's called the call number, you could go to the call number on the book and pull the book right off the shelf and use it if it was reference, or check it out if you were able to do so, if you had a library card and access to that particular library. By the way, the standard for genealogical research is the Chicago Manual of Style. We use Chicago Manual of Style predominantly in genealogy, if anybody's interested in knowing that information. Okay, so now we're going to move over to Archive Grid. Now,
Okay.
Yeah.
There's one question. So
Sure.
not every library participates with WorldCat, correct?
Not every library.
Uh-huh.
So many of them in the United States do, because the advantages are so obvious that it would probably be only very small libraries in very small towns.
Okay.
If they're larger, I mean, for example, if the book happened to be in the Provo Library, it would have come up with Provo Library here in Provo.
I've done an interlibrary loan for a patron, and the library send it in PDF that the patron could just have.
Sometimes if it's not copyrighted, it's easier to do that. It's cheaper instead of sending the physical book through the mail. Yeah, I mean, there's today, And bear in mind that copyright is, it marches on, as they say, and that now we're at 2022, 1923, we're up to about 1923. Anything before 1923 is going to be passing and it should be in public domain, more or less. There's some exceptions. But so, yeah, there's a lot of information that you're just going to find. And it's very possible also that the book is digitized. When I mentioned archive.org and 36 million volumes digitized, those are completely indexed. I mean, in other words, you can search every single word in all 36 million of those books and records. They're not just cataloged. They're there. And so they have, it's amazing. I mean, the amount of information out there. Okay, archive.grid basically does the same thing for archives. It includes over 7 million records describing archival materials, bringing together information about the historical documents. These are primarily the records in a library would be called the special collections library in a larger library, a university library or whatever, and an archive or historical societies. And so when you look and it handles over 1,400 archival institutions, and they're primarily in the United States. So if I go here, you can see here's a map where they have all of them marked. So you can zoom in on this map and see where all the archives are around you and see where you might have to go to get that particular amount of information. So here's, for example, a list. I just searched under Arizona. Always you'll start out with Arizona. And here are partial lists. This is a scrollable list, and there's more on this list than showed up when I did the screenshot. But you can see here, Arizona Historical Society, and then you have Lowell Observatory Library and Flagstaff and ASU, the ASU libraries, the Arizona State Museum and the Mesa Public Library, and the Museum of Northern Arizona, the Phoenix Public Library, Pima Community College, and so forth. And down, if you scrolled, you'd find University of Arizona and the other areas and a lot of other places in Arizona. So these are all the libraries and archives that are listed. This isn't the list of what is available on WorldCat. This is the list of what is available from the archival holdings of the various archives and libraries. There's a little bit of a difference there and somewhat of an overlap, but not really, because these archive materials are materials that contain collections of items that have been collected about or by individuals or companies or whatever. For example, railroad records in the United States. Your ancestors, if they lived in certain parts of the country, may have been employed by the railroad. Railroad records are not generally searchable online. You can find where the collections are, but basically what's going to happen is you're going to find them in a library or an archive. And that's where you're going to have to contact to find that information. So there's just all sorts of ways and types of records. Agricultural records end up in archives. Individuals who are, for whatever reason, have a body of records. Now, a lot of people wonder if they can donate, say, their family records that they've had and accumulated over the years. Can they donate those to the library? And under some circumstances, the answer is yes, and it depends on a lot of different conditions. If you have that kind of a question, you're surely welcome to call me and discuss where you would, what kind of items could be included in an archive, and which kind of archive that you would be going to ask if they would be interested in the records. I've been putting records into archives such as the BYU Special Collections and the Church History Museum in Salt Lake City and the University of Arizona. I put them in different archives. and also documents for people that find an original document that is some historical interest and those kinds of things. So those are the kinds of things that we're involved with here. Okay, let's move along here. So once you get into archive.org, so I clicked on Arizona State Library Archives and Public Records, and here it's going to tell you the people that where there are collections of their records. So Paul Fannin, for example, Paul Jones Fannin was a governor of Arizona, and he had a body of records that had to do with his correspondence and all of his information, and he or his heirs, whoever inherited those records, donated those records to the Arizona State Library, and the Arizona State Library then puts them in storage, organizes them and catalogs them, and then puts them in an archive called the Paul J. Fannin Papers, and that then becomes something that can be searched. The only way you're going to see those records, however, they're not digitized usually, and the effort to get all those digitized is going to take a mammoth more amount of time than it has already to just get the first level of records digitized. But those records, once they are digitized, that's fine, but you still might have restrictions, because you'll notice that he died in 2002. So it's not going to be a long time. It's going to be a real long time and a real cold day in Arizona, in Mesa before, and in Phoenix before the Arizona State Library makes all of those records available online. And so, it's just really kind of that's interesting. Down here, there's the records of Jacob Waltz, and I don't know if that name rings a bell with anyone, but that's Jacob Waltzer was his name, and he is the person that they refer to as the Lost Dutchman, who was the person. He was actually German, he wasn't Dutch, and he was the one about the gold mine and the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, just in case you wanted to know. So if you wanted to read all the papers that they have on Jacob Waltzer, you could go to the Arizona State Library and start your search for the Dutchman mine. Over here, Lost Dutchman mine. They have lots of stuff on that too. Okay. So there's a lot of things in the library and the archives, and it's hard to tell you how much more there is than you would imagine on any kind of information. For example, I did some research on my great-grandfather, Henry Martin Tanner, who lived in a little tiny town in Arizona called Joseph City. And he was one of the original pioneers back in 1877. And he lived there all the rest of his life until he died, and he happened to die in Gilbert, Arizona. But finding information on him was interesting. And I eventually found, before all this became readily available, I discovered that his papers about him had been collected by his son, who was an author and had written some books. And I went to search for his papers, and I finally found that they were in the University of Utah. Although he lived in Arizona, the papers were in the University of Utah because that's where they put them. And then I found out that there was a copy of the papers in the Northern Arizona University Library. And so we went in and got the papers. And basically it was about, they said, and it's measured, these library archives are measured in inches and feet. It was about 6 feet of records. Okay, so that many records. So we went through and one afternoon and took photographs of the records we were most interested in, and the ones that we knew we could not find outside of the archives. And today I just dug back into my old pile of digital images, and I'm in the process of putting together some of the images that we took back then, putting them in PDF format so I can start doing some research in them. So you never know what you're going to get when you go into an archive. So these two tools, the Archive Grid and WorldCat, help you understand that there are always more records to search. When somebody says I'm at a brick wall and I've looked everywhere, my answer is, have you ever been to the New York Public Library? And the answer usually is, why would I go to the New York Public Library? And I'd say, well, it's one of the largest genealogical collections in the United States. And I just thought maybe since you've searched everywhere, you may have searched there. But I've stopped saying that now, but I still want to encourage people to go beyond what they think is a complete search and start getting into the real records that exist in these libraries. Now, this is your bonus website, just for those of you who may actually be research oriented. It's Zotero, and some of you may already use it. If so, well done. But Zotero is free. It is a website developed by MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it basically gives you a way to cite information. It copies entries directly out of WorldCat, and so you can go in there and just click on a little icon, and it will automatically collect all of the bibliographic information. As you can see, anything on an article, about the article and its place, and the website that you got it in, and everything else. So you can just click once and have all of that record, and then you can choose a whole list, like 100 items, and tell it to create a bibliography that'll go at the end of your citations, and it will do the entire citation process. If I'd had these tools when I was in graduate school, instead of taking almost 9 months and a great deal of pain and effort to do my master's thesis, we probably could have cranked it out in a week. So we're just, it's just so we're a different world, and there's different tools. Okay, that comes to the end. And the admonition here is WorldCat and Archive Grid are websites where you should look, where you look first, not last. This isn't the last place you go. This is the first place you go to find what everyone else has done about this. Okay, thank you so much.